and video on Facebook Live, Periscope, Twitch, LinkedIn Live, and YouTube. A conversation about life, entrepreneurship, personal development, family, tech, and marketing. Of course, my name is Ivan Temelkov, and I'm your host. And today, I'm joined by Bernie Reiterer. Did I pronounce your last name correctly? Is that correct?
Well, almost so like every English-speaking person would pronounce it. In the place where I'm coming from, it's Reiterer, but I'm used to hear it that way.
I apologize. I have an Eastern European name, so it's one of those things that I give it a good shot. Let's put it that way. But let me tell you guys a little bit about Bernie before we start chatting. So he's an innovator, tech aficionado, and a tremendously lazy person. That is why he became an entrepreneur to help people avoid doing useless things. A payments and fintech veteran, having launched innovation all over the world. Now Latham in Antarctica is still on his list. A builder and shaper who can't just accept the status quo. So he made his profession a passion because most jobs simply can't offer that. Digitization has brought us so far. Now is the time to deal with it the proper way. So Bernie is the CEO of SignD, where they make identities and verification human ready. So Bernie, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ivan. Pleasure being here. Thanks for
Awesome,
inviting
man.
me.
So let's start with, let's talk about your background, where you came from. So you're in Finland. Is it Finland? Is that where you're from?
Well, we also got a lot of snow, and we've got good, ski jumpers and good skiers. But it's Austria, actually.
Austria. All right. That's Austria. Right. You know what? So I'm from
Exactly.
Eastern Europe. I probably should have gotten a better guess, but I don't know, for some reason, like when fintech was in your bio, I was like, Finland? I forgot to ask what country it was. So, okay, Austria. Tell us a little bit about, your early childhood. I mean, how did you get into entrepreneurship? Like, was there like kind of that early age interest in entrepreneurship? Let's hear a little bit about it.
Mm, yes, definitely. I mean, I grew up in a small village. My father had a restaurant, and also grandfather, and before that, there was always small business owners, people who were employing other people, working at risk, and facing those challenges, but also kind of seeing the benefits of that when you create something on your own and we shape something, and that's definitely something which added a lot to my attitude, and also the way how I deal with people, how I get interest in people. So this is something which is going through along all the things that I've done. So I most of my professional career I spent in kind of product related, innovation related services. And what
Mhm.
always differentiated me, for example, is I always went to the user to understand what they want. And this is exactly what you do also in a restaurant. If you're a waiter, and it's in a family business, you're not getting paid for all that hours that you're working. So
Right.
you heavily rely on tips. So to get a tip, you have to serve properly to understand what your need is and sell them something they don't necessarily need. But this is something which kind of created a will to make life more pleasant for people, to understand them, and to find out what is the motivation. And this pretty soon actually materialized also in, together with the experience probably of seeing how a business is run, and how all those risks and the benefits
Mhm.
are coming in, where I said, mm, it created something inside me. Having said that, I mean, I also started a very typical corporate career. So
Mhm.
during university, and I was always working and was always doing freelancing also, very early on in my life. Um, but my first job was a normal standard job in a software company. I was starting there as software tester, then went on in creating all the concepts, business requirements, and pretty soon stepped up the ladder, and leading really large commercial projects at a bloody young age. And that that on the one hand side, of course, told me something about technology, but it also told me about hard work, how to really get projects done, and how to get the benefits there, and this
Mhm.
this this kind of entrepreneurial basis. that I inherited always helped me to be pretty successful in those things, because it's it's not the typical things that you do if you have an entrepreneurial spirit, even if you're
Right.
working within a company. And later on, I after that company where we spent, I don't know, 5 6 years, something like that, I went on to a credit card company. And also there I was looking for stuff which is innovative, where I can create things from scratch. So in that company, for example, I created the basically introduced prepaid credit cards, to the Central European continent. And
Mm-hmm.
it has been a venture within the company, but this is something which continued also when I was working at Western Union, for example. Created a B2B business right from scratch within 9 months, full-fledged. Companies like Google, Bivin, and International Criminal Court. And that was always the wish to create something, the wish to set something up. But it was
Mm-hmm.
always all those boundaries that you have in within the company, which is also, when those boundaries really kick in, that was usually when I kind of fought on. But at some point of time, I just said, okay, let's also move on. Let's move on. And it
Yeah.
was at that time, looking, well, what can I do? I wanted to, there was a pressure to do something, create something, do something on your own. I was jumping to the next job, then I moved to the UK, working for a startup, and I said, okay, let's work for a startup at least. Then
Right.
said, okay, screw it all. And more than 10 years ago, I just said, okay, let's start off with something where I can define what I'm doing. I can select the project. Started off with some consulting, which I did for quite some time. Always innovation consulting and creating new business lines, sometimes for small companies, sometimes for
Mm-hmm.
large multinationals, mobile payment systems on 3 different continents. Really, really amazing stuff. And I also got fed up with that at some point of time, because you're still creating something for somebody else, which is sometimes really, really cool, and it helps people.
Right.
But and then I just said, all right, so now is the time. I found my niche. I found the idea, and I just said, okay, let's scrap all of that, what I've done, stop the consulting business, focused full time on that, took all my savings and said, okay, let's go into that and create something which I really, really believe in, which really can help people. And that was the starting point of Sign actually.
Yeah. So, first of all, I have to say that your English is amazing. I think being from Austria, obviously, and me being a fellow Eastern European, it's I know what it took to go through that. But you've had a lot of experience. You've worked in the UK, and you've had a lot of interaction. So it was almost a necessity, which I think nowadays you have to know English. It's the global language that everybody speaks, whether it's the UK English or the American English. But you've been able to
True.
master that very well. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because I know that communication is a big essential, because communication solves problems. So being able to speak, on a global stage, a global language, is extremely important, to be able to break through. Something interesting you said about entrepreneurship, and I always ask about the stories because I'm curious, especially coming from Austria. Like, starting out, you said your father had a restaurant, which was really interesting, and I can kind of resonate with that a little bit because my father is an entrepreneur as well, and I
Right.
remember kind of like the early days of like entrepreneurial signs also, and then you were kind of speaking on that as well when you said like you work for these companies and you enjoy what you were doing, then you went into the startup community, but there was always like this fire, like almost this burning fire to build something of your own, something that you would be extremely passionate about, something that you would wake up excited to every day. I mean, let's face it, I mean, waking up to doing the job like a typical 9 to 5 is exciting for a lot of people because they know what they're going to be doing every day. But the entrepreneur, it's almost unpredictable. Like, you've got a vision for what you're striving towards, but that vision could take 3, 5, 10, 20, 30 years to execute. And so it's a long game. It's a long game. As a fellow entrepreneur, you talked about that, and I admire that because I know what the long game is, and it's let's just add that it's risky. There's a lot of
Yeah.
sacrifice, there's a lot of setbacks, and it really differentiates, from country to country, worldwide too, because of economics and resources. Also, so I definitely admire that, you've had that entrepreneurial, and you still have that entrepreneurial fire to where you're excited about what you do, because I think as an entrepreneur, you need to be excited about what you do, excited to the point to where you love it. It's the thing that drives you, whether it's just a passion or there's a why and a purpose behind it. Because that's one thing for me personally is, and I know we talked about this before we hit record, is we're both fathers. Ironically enough, both of our kids are the same age, and boy and girl. But that's a why for me. Because when I look at that, it's like, how can I build a better future for my kids with more opportunities and accessibility that I did not have growing up? I mean, let's face it, I grew up in a former communist country until the age of 9. So we didn't have anything. And then immigrating through refugee camp and coming to the United States in 1994, I was 14 years old at the time. That was 26 years ago. And so I can resonate with a lot of those struggles, going through those challenges from an entrepreneurial standpoint. And very much like you, I think it was a very early age on the playground in my grandmother's small village of 500 people, riding my bike till 10 o'clock at night and making bad deals with kids that I probably shouldn't associate with, And I think that was probably one of the early beginnings. So let's talk a little bit about like Sign D. Tell us a little bit about Sign D. What do you guys do? And, how do you help other businesses and entrepreneurs with what you do?
Sure, happy to do so. So let's call Sign D a company that understands technology and makes it easy. So we're in the business of identifying people for the sake of KYC, bank onboarding. So very, very boring stuff in reality. And it's personally, I'm coming mostly from the payments industry. So there's something which is very, very often quoted, like the next big innovation in payments is actually to make payments redundant. Just like Uber is doing that, make the payment itself invisible, right? Because people want to go from A to B. That's the only thing they want to do. They don't want to pay. So the right innovation in payment is to get rid of it, or at least to get rid of the act of payment. And we're doing a very similar thing for the onboarding. Because if I want a bank account, I'm not interested in doing a video identification. I'm not interested in going to a bank branch. I'm not interested in doing all of those, form fillings and stuff like that. And what we do at Sign D is to make that process, that journey seamless. So as fast as possible, as automated as possible, and with as little clicks as possible. Because the technology is there. The process just needs to be implemented. And of course, there's a lot of things. A bank account is not like buying sweets at the corner shop. There is a certain due diligence which is required, and we created all the know-how and the technologies that are able to meet that for our clients, which are then the banks or the telecom operators, travel operators, whatever it is. But we just package that in a way so that it's super easy for the consumers, and it's no hurdles, especially. While it's still very, very compliant and ticks all the boxes for our clients.
One thing that you mentioned that I wanted to allude to is you talked about how Uber has made it so seamless. In fact, I'm traveling to Houston for a client this week, and later this week into next week, and that's literally what I ordered: Uber from my house to the airport. And set aside the Uber drama and bullshit that went down with their CEO, they truly do have accessible technology. And, so 2020 was, the COVID year. They'll be remembered, at least for most, for, millenniums, probably. It was the one year that, really changed humanity in a lot of ways. It changed the way business was done. Yeah. And Amazon was one of the companies that, and believe it or not, they opened up a ginormous warehouse 15 minutes away from my house that is probably employing close to 100,000 people, I would say, 50,000 at the very least. It's huge. It's like 300,000 square feet. It's ginormous. You can see it off the
Crazy.
highway. But here's what Amazon did. So as you know, as an entrepreneur, where there's a problem, a solution awaits. You just need to figure out how to create that solution. And by the way, the bigger the problem, the bigger the solution. So a lot of people bashed on Bezos for becoming, well, last year until Elon Musk just surpassed him by $1 billion. He was the world's wealthiest person. I think 186 billion net worth or something like that, or 185 billion, because now Musk is at 186 billion after the Tesla stock jumped by $1 billion, right? It's only $1 billion.
Oh, come on, who cares?
Who cares? It's only $1 billion, right? But here's what Amazon actually did, and I think you were speaking to this: is human beings appreciate convenience and accessibility, believe it or not. And it's actually kind of frightening in a way, because what happened last year is, and so Amazon is accessible just about everywhere in the United States. And in fact, well, you being in Austria, actually I had a cousin who lived in Germany, and she was telling me how Amazon was delivering groceries same day. Or Amazon same day grocery delivery, which hasn't fully rolled out in the United States yet since their acquisition of Whole Foods. But here's what they did: they took COVID and they said, you know what? Most people, remote work is the new standard. Just people don't want to go to an office. I mean, yes, they do, but they don't. They go because of the human interaction, but they'd rather choose the accessibility and convenience to stay home and work. So I think that's changing the work environment and the culture, for one. But here's what Amazon did: is they figured out, you know what? Why don't we become more accessible and convenient to the consumer? So they start ordering toilet paper, sanitizer, anything you can think of, furniture, technology, you can buy it from Amazon. And most people were going like, oh my God, Amazon is stealing from the retail industry. It's like, no, they're not. They just got more creative and figured out how to read the human mindset is what they did. And so, like you were saying, like people don't want to jump hoops through, complicated payment processing. Like I know, I think is it Chase or Capital One? Capital One has really made a huge splash with this. Exactly what you just said. You can open a Capital One account in 5 minutes, literally. Just click, 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 tap from a mobile app. It's convenient, it's accessible, it's quick. And I think, being an Eastern European, I remember, so the last time I visited Bulgaria, believe it or not, was 2007. And I remember like the hoops I had to jump through back in the day. Like I had to call my bank and say, I'm traveling internationally. So if you see some weird charges, it's from me, And nowadays it's just like people just don't want to go through those hoops. It's frustrating, it's challenging, it's time consuming. And the one thing that consumers value now more than ever is their time, because you'll never get that time back that you waste. And you know this in business, right? It's just that if you don't value your time, someone else will value it for you. And usually they will devalue it because they don't see the value of what you bring to the table. So I want to shift the conversation, more into like the payment processing and specifically around the fact of, in 2020 when COVID hit, how did you and Sign D, pivot to that? Like, how did you accommodate? What things did you do to be able to adapt to the changing environment?
Well, I mean, the one thing is we are a digitization company. So our goal is to help, doesn't matter if it's startups, traditional companies, or whoever it is, to have remote or automated onboarding processes. So that was, of course, in general, a good, if you can call it good, but for us, in general, from a business perspective, a good change. What was not as good is that we had a large rollout for 7 countries with physical venues, which was, supposed to happen in March. Then the lockdown came. Yeah. We wanted to start it again in October. Then the next lockdown came. That was extremely bad because it was a super huge project. And we also had a couple of large projects with pretty big banks, actually, insurance companies. And we of course were of the opinion. So I mean, we're talking about an online loan application. We're talking about identification for life insurance, all of those things. So that gets additional pressure, speeding up the process of implementing that. When the first bank said, well, during Corona, we don't have the resources to do like online onboarding. I said, wait a second. What do you mean? So you mean the people should go to your bank branch to open a loan instead of going online? You guys serious about that? But
Yeah.
I just realized. I mean, they just sent every IT person and half of the staff into home office, and they were, well, most of the time paid but not working. So that was quite an interesting thing when we realized. All right, so the big fish we were dealing with, they were just stunned. We're just stunned and gone. I was like, all right,
Yeah.
interesting. So what are we going to do now? And then we said, we are a digitization company. We're talking with those big fish that need us, that wanted to do with us before COVID. And now they're all pausing the project. It's a bad situation, obviously. So let's see what else we can do. So we changed geography. So we're
Right.
focusing on the same clients like financial institutions, telecom operators now in Africa, or starting now in Latin as well. And we just realized, oh my God, we should have done that immediately because they're faster, more professional, and got more client as well. So that was one thing, and we also went into different industry. So sharing economy or other things, we just
Yeah.
apply our solutions in a slightly different context, because knowing a customer is of benefit for every company. It's not just to fulfill any compliance, but
Right. Right.
you can serve them better. You can avoid risk or fraud and stuff like that. And also, that may sound a little bit weird, but by having a strong identification, you can be much more privacy friendly from that perspective, because you
Right.
don't collect crap.
You know, that's an excellent point that you made. And here's why I question how you sustained COVID is because I almost kind of knew that COVID was actually an opportunity for you. But the challenge was is being able to entice these dinosaur organizations that were unwilling to pivot. And this wasn't like a complete pivot into like a different industry or even a vertical within their industry. It was a pivot of basically changing their operations
Yeah.
is what it was. And, did you, and that's a really good point because in the United States, that's literally what was happening. Literally, I know several clients that we work with specifically, they just didn't want to pivot. I'm like, okay, you really have two options is you fold or you try to sustain. Like it's a no fucking brainer if you ask me,
Yeah.
you want to sustain, you've got a lot invested in this.
Do
So
something. Yeah.
do something about it, right? Like change your ways. And that's a good thing because it can help position you as an authority when you're thriving during a challenging time. And in fact, I think we saw a lot of small businesses that actually thrive. But question I have for you, were there any regulatory things? Because I know with digitization, it's a very with like the finance space, at least in the United States, it's a very regulated space,
Mm.
right? With like everything that's happening with Bitcoin and all of that right now, it's just like there's too much rumor to be too many myths to be debunked, right? Still, I think it's very in that direction. Don't get me wrong, but did you face any challenges with like regulatory, like trying to help these organizations like really digitize? Because obviously in Europe things are done significantly different, right? Well, I shouldn't say significantly different, but I feel like there's more hoops to jump, right,
Yeah.
to get compliance.
Yeah.
So did you face any compliance, any regulatory issues? And, how did you get around those? Because I understand the convenience and accessibility. You're absolutely right. I agree with you. It's just, how did you overcome those? What things did you do to be able to overcome those
Mm.
challenges?
And dealing with regulators and compliance, that's kind of to a certain degree, that's a day-to-day job for us, because we created a platform that is, you can think a little bit of like of Lego. We're just saying, tell me what's your jurisdiction, tell me what's your use case, and we just combine those components in a way that it's compliant with law, but still very, very convenient for the consumer.
Right.
So we we're used to that, but the big issue that was happening was more like the regulators were they knew they had to do something. The industries were talking with those guys, and they just were headless, more or less. So what we saw is, as we always have certain interactions with those guys, they were just not responding anymore. We just stopped communications. You wait for 3 months for an answer and something like that. It's like, okay, you have been really bad before, but what you're now doing is just like crazy.
Yeah.
And it's a funny coincidence. I mean, yes, Europe is super fragmented. There's super idiotic rules out there, and it's really happening very, very often with supervision. We had that with the banking crash as well. You tighten regulation, so you incentivize the regulated entities to be, and the employees in there, to be more creative in doing things in the gray area to still earn their bonuses. So tightening regulations usually increases fraud, and we still see that all the time. And funny as it is, Europe, being extremely fragmented here, has some super idiotic rules of adopting old law into even older regulation. And there's a
Right.
there's a quote of the former Vodafone CEO or president. I don't remember. It doesn't matter. And he was saying, so if you digitize a shitty process, you get a shitty digital process.
Right.
And that's true.
It's absolutely true. And I think I was telling you this before, we hit record, that back in 2007, which was, 13, almost 14 years ago, when I was home in Bulgaria to visit, like the shit I had to go through, I had to call my bank and say, I'm going to be using my debit card. If you see some weird charges, and I think that was around the time the euro was actually coming in. If you see like some weird charges or something, it's me. So like I had to go through these extra steps to plant or create my own security net. And as a consumer, I don't want to do that. It's time consuming to me. Like it should already be built into the technology to be intelligent enough. It's like, especially now in 2021, where like AI and technology has evolved so much, and there's the Ubers of the world. I'm like, what the hell? Like, if you're going to force me to do this, I'm going to go to a different bank. I'm going to get a different card. Exactly.
I used that in my sales presentations in the past, and now I'm using that again. There's a fantastic picture, actually. You know that 2002, men had an attention span of about 16, 17 seconds. Wait a second, it's coming. In 2012, we fell below goldfish. The goldfish has an attention span of 9.6 seconds. We had 8 seconds. And it's getting better. So the millennials, Generation Z and stuff like that, we're now at 2.6 bloody seconds. So you have to sell or grab the attention of somebody within 2.6 seconds and start serving those guys. That's what's reality now.
Yeah. No, you read my mind, actually. The goldfish scenario, I've told that before, actually, and some people are like, what the fuck, Ivan? Like, is this true? I'm like, no, you go do your own research, because being in the digital space, and I do a lot of digital marketing with different clients, I have to explain to them why you have to attract the consumer from multiple channels, is because they get bored. Basically, in 2.6 seconds, they get bored. That's why you need to be doing all these different things. But you're absolutely right. There's a lot of dinosaur companies, and not just in the US, but even in Europe, that are just like you said, if you try to create a new digital process and you embrace an old shitty process, you get a shitty digital process. And you know what? There's nobody to blame but you. And I think a lot of these companies during COVID last year were trying to blame the economy. They were trying to blame the pandemic. They were trying to blame, scientists. They were trying to blame, and let's face it, historically, putting blame on something you can't control is just not a smart business move. It's not. Because what you need to be doing is figuring out how to disrupt and innovate. In fact, disruption and innovation are two of the core values within my company. Because when I look at what Tesla has done, And there's actually a funny story about that because it's technology oriented, right? So literally Tesla has their, they can push the red button and put a hold on the entire automotive industry because they dominated completely. There's nobody's touching them. And mind you, I'm a fan of like Audi. I'm a huge Audi fan and exotic cars. And like, I'm like, yeah, they make great cars, but like, look at fucking Tesla, man. Like they got the automotive industry wrapped around their finger. Elon Musk, self-made billionaire, and now actually I noticed on your website that one of your employees was a former researcher at NASA. SpaceX now builds rockets for NASA.
Yes.
It has been for years. So like, let's look at history. Disruption and innovation always is a leap forward. And that's what you guys are doing with Signed. And let me tell you, I think the payment processing specifically and the transactional digitization is going to grow even more. I think we're just at the very early stages of it mainly because let's face it, almost every consumer on the face of this planet, where there's 9 billion people, I would probably say about 7 billion or 8 billion of those have a smartphone of some form or fashion. So what has the smartphone done? It has given us access. It has given us opportunities, but I think it's yet to evolve so much. I mean, we've seen gaming on smartphones. We've seen video on smartphones. We've seen Uber, Uber Eats, which I tend to order once in a while. And it's really about accessibility and convenience. So I want to shift. One last question I wanted to ask you is the type of companies that you work with at Signed to partner up with and offer your Lego based platform. And I love that analogy, Lego, is because you customize it to their needs specifically. But what companies do you usually partner up with, to help them digitize, their payment processing?
So in terms of clients, you mean it's extremely broad actually. So there's a strong focus on regulated industries where, for example, our biometrics or photo identification or data services are required more or less, where it's pretty easy to have those either compliance processes configured in a way or the payment securitization and those things. Then there's another segment, which is basically the high risk business. So we're dealing with foreign exchange companies, money transfer businesses, gambling companies, CBD, all of those things. Where there's always on one side a risk on the individual and a risk on the payment, and that's one of the things which is also making us different here. Because if you just imagine you have a CBD company, there's people from all around the world trying to buy that stuff. Every person has a different risk profile, so you cannot put just a uniform thing on it, and
Right.
you would just filter out good customers. We also see that with our company identification, our KYB solution, very much, which is also opening up the next large target group that we're having, which is typical payment processors, acquirers who are onboarding merchants and who are failing really to onboard small merchants, because the act of getting a merchant contract sometimes takes 7-8 weeks, filling out a form, getting an information trade register, identifying the directors, blah blah blah, back and forth, forgotten form. We just automate that to the matter of 2-3 minutes actually, and that's of course an amazing thing. But we're dealing with those money companies, but we're also dealing with the low hurdle entry companies for sharing economy, where they still need to know who that person may be, because sometimes they're exchanging valuable goods through Craigslist or something like that, or where it provides security without infringing in privacy.
Yeah. That's appreciate you elaborating upon that, because I was curious with the kinds of companies they usually partner up with, and I think that's probably a differentiating factor too, because you have such a flexible platform, and I think that's key actually. Nowadays, especially in payment processing, you have to be flexible. You have to be modern. You have to be you have to have some level of innovation, that's going to create attraction for companies specifically. And I think, some of these bigger payment processing companies, I think they're actually behind the curve, if you ask me. You
Yeah,
know,
definitely.
I think I was talking with a friend that's a software developer at MasterCard,
Yeah,
and he was telling me about was it the Face ID
yeah.
technology, which they're working on. I think it's still in development technically, but anyway, we're talking about like compliance and regulatory
Hmm.
specifically, and he was telling me how much the local and federal government are really regulating that because the authenticity behind it.
Hmm.
It's like Face ID is you would think facial recognition, with like a smartphone, like an iPhone, has already been adopted because let's
Hmm.
face it, you can't duplicate the facial features of human beings unless you clone them,
Yeah.
and even then you probably can't do it, and I think that's a whole different conversation. But I think that's
Could
where
talk hours
things,
about that.
yeah, exactly. And look, I mean, I think one day, there's going to be robots doing a bunch of shit, and there
Uh,
already is, in fact, what was it? The first, is it in Dubai? I think it might be Dubai. The first AI robot that was embraced as a human, as a citizen. That's what it was, as a citizen.
I think yes. Yeah.
The Ava or something like that was her name. I read about this like a year or so ago, and it was so groundbreaking. But you know what? I think companies, when it comes to digitization, I think they're afraid. They're afraid
Hmm.
of the evolution. They're afraid of the leap of faith, and I don't know if that's regulatory and compliance based, or it's more about just lack of innovation, really, or lack of growth. I don't know. That's
Hmm.
that's a really good question, but I know we could chat a whole lot more about this, and I appreciate you, sharing so much with what you guys do at Sign D. Sounds like you're definitely, on the age of, disruption and innovation and leading that next wave of evolution when it comes to, the digitization, payment processing, authenticity. So I'm excited about everything that you guys are doing, and congratulations, on all the growth. It sounds like I said, you found your niche, and now it's just like riding the wave for as long as you
Yeah.
can. Before we sign off, though, let's throw out some social handles, websites, anything you can think of. Ways that viewers and listeners can connect with you out there in the social space.
Hmm. Sure, absolutely. I mean, there's obviously there's our website where you can find us. Can we show that actually? Sometimes it's easier to show them than tell them. I mean, there's
The sign that ID. So I'll include that in the caption, obviously, of the
right. There's
podcast in
a
the description. So,
yeah. We can put the LinkedIn or Twitter
mhm,
where you can
yep,
follow. That's always. I mean, please feel free to connect on LinkedIn. Bernhard Reiterer, my name there. Bernhard Reiterer one. So that's going to be not good to remember. So if we can add that, that's fantastic. And always open to have any discussion about, identity verification, payments for small and big companies. So definitely we're we're going to build our own YouTube channel as well, but that's in the making.
yeah.
And yeah, we're going to feature the podcast then as soon as we have that up and running.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Bernie, I want to thank you for your time, man. I really enjoyed the conversation, from one entrepreneur to another. Very excited for everything that you've done, and wishing you all the best in 2021. I think this is going to be an even better year. I know 2020 was a groundbreaking year for you. So I'm excited to see what 2021 brings for you and your company.
Thank you so